Welcome to question 58 of Secunda Secundae as we talk about justice in this treatise on the Cardinal Virtues. And this is a big, long section in this treatise because justice has to do with our relations with other people, and that's a big part of life. And so Thomas really goes in a lot of different directions. This particular question has 12 different articles, and so this is going to be pretty long, but it is interesting. A lot of things that are very practical in our everyday life as it relates to our dealings with other people. So let's get started with article number 1, which says whether justice is fittingly defined as being the perpetual and constant will to render to each one his right. I'm just going to say yes. Okay, Thomas does split hairs a little bit, but basically he likes this definition. Okay, the perpetual and constant will to render to each one his right. Now keep that will part in mind, because that's going to come back about whether what faculty of the human person is justice related to, and so will is going to come back. So I'm telling you now, that part of it's going to come back. So Article 2, whether justice is always towards one another. Yeah. See, he says, since justice is its name implies equality, it denotes essentially relation to another, for a thing is equal not to itself but to another. And I didn't mention this yesterday, but we always see the scales of justice, right? You got these, this scale. And that's the whole point, is that it's equal. And so the whole point is that when these scales are equal to each other, then you have justice, and therefore you have that whole notion of equality. Article 3, whether justice is a virtue. Well, of course, we know it is. It's one of the cardinal virtues. Thomas says a human virtue is one which renders a human act and man himself good. Okay, virtues make us good. And this can be applied to justice, for a man's act is made good through attaining the rule of reason, which is the rule whereby human acts are regulated. Hence, since justice regulates human operations, it is evident that it renders man's operations good. And then he quotes Tully, who is Cicero. He never calls him Cicero in the Summa. He calls him Tully. Says the luster of virtue appears above all in justice. And what you're going to find is that justice is the greatest of the moral virtues. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but he is going to make that point later on. Whether justice is in the will as its subject. Now, I could give you just a simple yes, because it is, but I think the explanation is interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and read a bit of this corpus here. He said the subject of a virtue is the power whose act that virtue aims at rectifying. Okay, what power is being rectified? Now, justice does not aim at directing an act of the cognitive power, for we are not said to be just through knowing something aright, so it doesn't have to do with knowledge, right? Hence, the subject of justice is not in the intellect or the reason, which is a cognitive power, but since we are said to be just through doing something aright, and because the proximate principle of action is the appetitive power, justice must needs be in the appetite power of the subject. Okay, so now one more little paragraph here. Now the appetite is twofold, namely the will, which is in the reason, and the sensitive appetite, which follows on sensitive apprehension. And it is divided into the irascible and the concupiscible. Okay, we've already gone over all this. Again, the act of rendering his due in each man cannot proceed from the sensitive appetite, because sensitive apprehension does not go so far as to be able to consider the relation of one to another, but this is proper to the reason. Therefore, justice cannot be in the irascible or concupiscible as its subject, but only in the will. So you know that we have intellect, we have will, we have passions, two types of passions. And so the higher part of the soul is going to be the reason and the will. And so this is, justice has to do with the higher part of the human person. Is it a general virtue? He says justice directs man in his relations with other men. Now, this may happen in two ways. First, as regards his relation with individuals. Secondly, as regards his relations with others in general, insofar as a man who serves the community serves all those who are included in the community. It follows, therefore, that the good of any virtue, whether such virtue directs man in relation to himself or in relation to certain other individuals, is referable to the common good to which justice directs, so that all acts of virtue can pertain to justice insofar as it directs man to the common good. I think what he's saying here is that even those virtues that deal with us individually, like temperance or fortitude, still are related to the common good, because if I am a drunkard or a lecherous person, that, even though it only has to do with myself, could affect the common good. So I think he's saying justice really relates to the common good in general. Common good is a very, very important part of Thomas's overall teaching in the Summa. Number 6, whether justice as a general virtue is essentially the same as all virtue. Now that's a big claim. He said legal virtue is said to be a general virtue inasmuch as it directs the acts of all the other virtues to its own end, and this is to move all the other virtues by its command. For just as, and I like this, just as charity may be called a general virtue insofar as it directs all acts to the virtue of the divine good, so is legal justice insofar as it directs the acts of all the virtues of the common good. So this is very important here, because we've always talked in the Summa about having these two, realms. You say we live down here on earth, but we're aspiring to go to the spiritual realm. That was the very first article in the Summa. Remember, whether besides philosophy any other doctrine is necessary. Well, yeah, there's another doctrine necessary because our goal, our end is not here below. So this is important. Justice is being equated to charity. Charity is directing us to our final end, divine, goodness. Justice is what directs us to the common good here below. All right, so I'll leave it at that, but that's very important. Article 7, whether there is a particular besides a general justice. He says, besides legal justice, which directs man immediately to the common good, there is a need for other virtues to direct him immediately in matters relating to particular goods. And these virtues may be relative to himself or to another person. Article 8, whether particular justice has a special matter. And he says, since justice is directed to others, it is not about the entire matter of moral virtue, but only about external actions and things. Okay, that one's a little bit confusing, but let's just leave that at that, okay? Because it's already turning out to be a pretty long video here. Whether justice is about the passions. And he's going to say, no. Okay, temperance, fortitude, those are about the passions. Because the virtue of justice is about the will. That has to do with the reason, and that's not about the passions. The passions are regulated by other virtues, but not by the will. Article 10, whether the mean of justice is the real mean. Remember, in the moral virtues, it seeks the mean, the middle between two, opposite vices. And he says, yeah, that's the case here with justice. And Article 11, whether the act of justice is to render each his own will. Yeah, that's a good, the act of justice is to render to each his own, his own. Okay, so that goes back to that definition we talked about previously. And finally, Article 12, whether justice stands foremost among all the virtues, all the moral virtues. He's going to say, yeah. He says, if we speak of legal justice, it is evident that it stands foremost among all the moral virtues, for as much as the common good transcends the individual good of one person. Remember, justice was equated in this life down below to charity in the life to come, right? The spiritual world. So this is a very important virtue. But even if we speak of particular justice, it excels the other moral virtues for two reasons. The first may be taken from the subject, because justice is in the more excellent part of the soul, the rational appetite or the will, whereas the other moral virtues are in the sensitive appetite. The second reason is taken from the object, because the other moral virtues are commendable in respect of the soul good of the virtuous person himself, whereas justice is praiseworthy in respect of the virtuous person being well disposed towards another. So he's saying that it's better to extend the justice to others than just to ourselves, because the common good is going to be, at play there. Finally, he says, for this reason, the greatest honors are accorded the brave and the just, since bravery is useful to others in warfare, and justice is useful to others both in warfare and the time of peace. So what he's saying here is that, the people that we honor the most, think of the Congressional Medal of Honor or the hero in war. That person is really esteemed in our culture because they are looking out for the common good. And I think maybe like even a great political leader might really be esteemed because they're looking out for the common good and not just their individual good, like maybe an actor or a professional football player or something like that may be seen as just kind of looking out for themselves. That's just me talking. All right, well, thank you for joining me. This has been the long video on justice, question 58 of Secunda Secundae, and we'll continue on the next video about other aspects of this cardinal virtue of justice. God bless you.